All right, great. So we'll call to order the meeting of the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group for November 17th at 6:02 p.m. So our agenda tonight is we're going to begin by recapping the last meeting. We're going to have member updates regarding site visits. Mr. Layton is going to give us an update regarding the orchard inventory, soil analysis, and procurement. Oh, thank you. Sarah Seward's going to give us an update on invasive species mitigation. We're going to review resources and categorize what we've gathered to date. We're going to create an action item calendar, discuss immediate action items. We're going to talk about the API restriction update and next steps. So we'll begin by recapping the last meeting. I thought last meeting was really great, actually. I walked away from it. I was very excited. I think this is a great group and we're going to get a lot done. So I appreciate, again, everybody coming forward and offering to help with this endeavor. So at the last meeting, we did discuss certain areas that we wanted to focus on. Regarding short and long-term goals, we did identify certain things that we needed to talk about, like invasive mitigation, visiting the site, creating an inventory of the orchard, a soil analysis, all of those things that we felt were important for the group to take a look at in the short term. So maybe we can start off by talking about site visits. Did anyone actually go and visit the orchard since the time of our last meeting?
Yes, I did. I walked around. I went around the perimeter, and I'm in the orchard a fair amount, but usually I don't go all the way to the back. And I started just exploring a little bit further, and honestly was a little distressed by what I saw. I didn't realize how much things had become overgrown, both with invasive species and just the piles that were down towards the back where the stone walls are. It was in a little rougher shape than I guess you can see from the street. So
are you referring down by Sarah Doublet?
I'm referring
like as you go down
on Nagog, okay. And then if you keep going further down through the stop sign and you head down, so down that way.
So I think, Jen, so what you're referring to on the map is RO4-50, and then some of it of 80. So I think, going forward, we can use the map and kind of at some point define what we're calling a block. It's going to be easier to just
what was that again?
Label. Yep. So that? Yeah, so it's R04-50, and then a little bit on the forward side of RO4-80.
Okay. I'll have to pull out the map again. I think that was Cindy. That was in the packet that you sent us originally.
I believe so, yeah.
The orchard map? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go back and pull that out.
And Jen, when you refer to piles, what are you referring to?
There's a lot, cut wood. So where things were pruned, I mean, there's some stacks of brush. There's some stacks of wood around on the outside on the perimeters, a little bit bigger. I think last time I walked that far back, you could still see the stone walls, and there's a lot of places where you can't, the stone wall is there, but it's covered, and thinking how on earth would you get rid of that? Or does it just stay there? Would you need a chipper? Could the fire department do a burn? So these things are just running through my head, but it was a lot more than I anticipated. Okay. I guess I was under the impression that it was kept up with a little bit better than it had been.
Okay. All right. Did anyone else visit the orchard?
You can reference some of those pictures that Jen's referring to are the ones that I uploaded that you can see from the street. You can just see the piles.
Okay. All right, great. So let's move on to that next. Sarah, actually, maybe we'll skip to you and go because you had done sent over a bunch of pictures. I don't know if you can share those, Joe, and have Sarah go through them.
I'm actually on a different computer. But you know, I only shared a few of them just to be able to see, you know, what we call ornamental or Asian bittersweet. It's prolific. It's not something that we can, you know, deal with quickly. So, but I think we need to look at the invasives that are surrounding the trees. And what I learned was, and Jen, one thing that we had talked about is like, do you have to actually pull it out of the apple trees? If you cut it at the bottom, it will die off. So it's more aesthetics if you want it growing up. But once we cut it, it will start to die. So, you know, it's a long-term item, but I think in terms of invasives, we start to look at the invasives that are encompassing the fruit trees. And so, and I showed a couple pictures of those. And, you know, I'm hopeful in that this hasn't been a long growth. It's not like it's gnarled into the trees. I think that if we cut it off, you know, this year, I think we'll be successful.
Okay. And which blocks were those located in, Sarah? Was it?
I'd say it's everywhere.
Everywhere. All right. Perfect.
Now, some places more than other. I honestly haven't walked through the whole part of the orchard, but you can see it when you drive by. If you see a tree and then you see something spiraling up, or you'll notice it. So,
okay.
Sarah, quick question for you. I don't know about the bittersweet, but you know, a lot of plants, when you cut them above the ground, they just grow back twice as bushy. So
they will grow back. They'll need some type of chemical treatment, and that's why I sent along some of those links and PDFs in what I sent today. They're very informative. So, and what you cut off, you can basically compost it, you can dry it, you can bury it if you go really far down in. But yeah, no, we would be talking chemical treatments on these, which is, I believe, what has been done always in the past. You know, it's just, it's one thing you can't, this is not a site to go organic. I mean, it's always been treated with chemicals. It's, in order to keep these invasives out, we'll have to carry on with that.
And Sarah, what is the time frame that something like that should be done?
You know, I think it's up to, once we have the analysis of the pruners, it might be nice to kind of do that along the same time. There are certain times it's already gone to berry and on to seed. So the birds are already taking them back to wherever they're going. So you can see, whenever you see the little kind of husks, you know that the birds are loving it right now.
Okay.
So we've kind of missed some of that time, but we'll just carry on and get after it later.
Okay.
And Sarah, so this is Amy's. So I recognize the place for chemicals in treating invasives. Like, I'm not totally oblivious to that, but is there a way that we can have like a cut stem approach to this, or that we can have an approach where, you know, we're using chemicals and then we're kind of moving to a little bit more of a thoughtful approach? Because I just want to be like thoughtful of the entire ecosystem and rebalancing the ecosystem.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question, but I think obviously it's going to have to be a little bit more robust in the beginning and then be able to get to tail back on that. That would be my hope for sure. It's just that I think honestly in the last 2 years, it's been so well maintained. And then I think, you know, with COVID and whatever, I think it's just gotten away from us. But I would hope that we can come back to that balance.
Yeah. And is there a way that, you know, when we're building the RFP, that we can sort of like have some, like language in there about using like a thoughtful, balanced, ecological approach to dealing with the invasives?
I don't know the orchard well enough. I think that's something that we can put on for future thought, but I think that's someone that obviously is an expert in orchards. You know, I think that invasives may really flourish, especially when there's drops underneath them. I know, you know, mice can get in there. So I think that it's obviously out of my expertise, and I think we would defer to experts on that. But certainly I think that can, you know, we can try and see for future tenants if that's something we can work with.
And also when we put together the RFP, we asked for them to submit a management plan, including not only you know, pest management and also, you know, insecticide, fungicide, but also invasive species. So that would be something that we can also inquire and evaluate what their philosophy and what their approach is, and we can provide direction, but we also need to probably recognize that there's, as Sarah said, there's some urgent need, and to get things under control, that maybe there is a little bit of a ramp up, and that hopefully we can get towards some form of a balance.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so Joe, do you want to now give us a recap on what you worked on this week with the orchard inventory, wherever we're at on that, soil analysis, and then we can talk about procurement.
Okay, so shared this out again today, and I'm using our town platform, which is primarily Microsoft based. We don't have any sort of Google, but I can always use my own personal account if we need to set something up. But got from some of you, and some of you did log on and add some information, so thank you very much. So started identifying some of the resources, for orchard assessment. Jen did reach out to DPW and talked with them about getting information. I also did receive somewhat of a blind inquiry from someone who runs a cider business that does their operation out of Leominster, and was really looking and found out about by someone who was within Littleton about leasing the orchard, and we talked a little bit about his operation, what he currently does as far as owning a existing orchard, how he has relationships with orchards all across New England to get a variety of different kinds, and also the resources that he knows as far as UMass, with people with arborists, with pesticide management, and all those things. So definitely was someone that wanted to learn more about what we were doing. So I gave him an overview as far as the working group, and also the role of the working group and providing recommendations to the select board, with the hopes that then we can develop an RFP towards the end of the year. So it was something that he was someone that was definitely interested. If any of, because I also know from conversations with others, other of you or other people in general, that there's also some interest. So if you have anything that at least we can keep a contact list to, as we evaluate the RFP and other things, keeping in mind, what maybe some possibilities are, at least we can keep track of that. One of the other things that did was I did have a conversation with Charles Auger, and he does have an inventory. He has a map basically identifying like all the different varieties. But he said like that was something that he has to find. It's just filed away, so he has to give him some time so he can locate that. And he did say that it may not be up to date, that it was produced a number of years ago, but that he knows the orchard as far as by site. So if there was some sort of reconciling of changes, because he did say that over his time there, they've replaced and planted, about, he says, 3,000 trees. But it's always a good starting point. So once I get that, I'll let you all know. And I don't know what form it is, so hopefully it will be something that I can scan in and send to everyone.
Okay. All right, great. And I think I saw on that list too that the soil analysis, there was a discussion with Chris Stoddard, the DPW, but that information they're going to look for. Jen,
they're going to look for it. Yeah, Chris is on vacation till after Thanksgiving. But Ashley Pinard was going to speak with Steve Witten, maybe Steve, and see if she said, I won't leave you guys hanging. I'll try to get you that information as soon as I can.
Okay.
May I ask a question? Can we run a parallel track to that? And Will, this might be where you're more versed on this with like the NRCS. We've got Soil Conservation Services. And so we've also got UMass Amherst. I know a lot of the farmers can send out, and I think it's a fairly nominal fee that we can send out soil samples as well. So there are a lot of nonprofits that I think we can align with the town to go ahead and get some soils done, if that's where the commission wants to go.
Okay.
I can certainly
Yes,
ask Amy about that, but I
so,
think, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so NRCS, I think that's a federal program. It's not a nonprofit, just to clarify, but that's not the point. But I would actually really recommend sending soil tests out to Cornell. They do some of the best soil tests in the country. And they're definitely more expensive, but I think they're definitely worth it. I think kind of the expertise comes in the analysis of it, and the recommendations. I think that's where you're really paying for the value of it. And just from my own experience, it can take a year to get someone from NRCS out to your farm. UMass might be a little bit quicker. I don't know if their departments are a little short on funding because of the pandemic, and whether some of the departments don't have as much money to do the outreach. Part of their job is to do outreach into community, but I don't know like where their funding stands and their staffing stands. It just might be a good question to ask in terms of getting somebody quickly.
Will, can I ask you to chime in where farmers send their soil samples nowadays?
We use the company Spectrum Analytical, and they're out in Ohio. Generally speaking, with a soil analysis, UMass tends to be kind of on the conservative side. They hit the mark as far as I can't think of it's an acronym. I can't think of what it's sort of a minimum, meets the minimum requirements of recommendations. Usually with the companies, anybody that's going to run the orchard is going to get a company, an agronomy company that's going to come in, that's going to come up with a spray plan, a fertilizer plan, help with the watering, and monitoring for pests throughout the season, and adapting and adjusting the plan throughout the season. It's a fluid thing, dealing like this year we had a lot of rain, other years it's dry. There's different opportunistic pests that are going to come in there, and you want to, or we at our farm typically go with a company that's kind of all inclusive. So they're going to be, in one sense, I appreciate the Cornell as a soil science lab, and that can avoid kind of getting the operator sold something that they might not need potentially. But also when you're working with agricultural companies, they're, if they're not producing for you, you're not going to hire them back. And it's a closer relationship. You're not dealing with someone in the lab out in Ithaca. You're dealing with someone that's at the orchard, seeing what's going on and can react in due time, that has the product to sell you that's going to remedy, whatever situation you might be in. And each company, to be honest, I think they each have their preferred laboratory. That doesn't mean that their preferred laboratory might not be Cornell or UVM or whomever, but it's important to understand that you're taking the sample to correct the issue, and you need to have a product available to deal with what you're dealing with. As far as the overall the topography and the soil, there should be at the USDA office over in Westford, it's the same as the NRCS office. They should have a rough idea of the soil types, the soil profile, in a general term, not on a nutrient term, but they can obviously explain where the heavier clays are and more loamy, more the ledge and that sort of thing, which might help with planning as far as sort of the microclimates. There's a couple different microclimates. Down behind the house, it's very low, it's going to be colder. Frost is going to settle in there quicker. Up on the hill, kind of catty corner diagonally across from the house that's higher ground. Talking with Sean O'Neill when he was there, he said there's probably a 4 or 5 degree difference on a cold morning. And if you're dealing with getting a crop off the trees into storage and keeping it saleable, those microclimates are going to matter. At a quick look at things, it's possible if somebody was looking for year-round income, maybe Christmas trees are the thing to do down behind the house in the colder soil. Now that doesn't It's just a suggestion or a possibility. But usually the companies you're working with are going to provide the expertise on the analysis and have a product to deal with what you're,
Will, are you familiar with that name on the list that Pat, Creakionitis?
So in my experience, I'm going to be dealing more with forages and row crops, and orchard and nursery and landscape stuff is different. I'm not familiar with him.
Okay.
We use a company, Nutrients, and they are out of, I think, Hadley. I think it's Hadley. Might be. I think it's Hadley. Not
What's it
positive.
called again?
Nutrient, and like kind of like nutrient without the P. That's a national company. There's also we've worked with Helena Chemicals, HELENA, and that's where we get our seeds, and then some herbicides. And we also deal with Caravale, which is short for Carolina Eastern Vale, and that's also a company that has its franchise. It's a national company. Each one of those is, I think they're national. They're at least up and down the East Coast here.
Can I ask a question? And this is a general question to the committee members. Are we, and I think, Amy, this kind of comes back and you sparked something with me about, ultimately, what are we going to put in the RFP? But are we micromanaging right now in terms of soils when we're not obviously going to be the ones that are going to pull the test or pay for the test? So it comes back to what we talked about at the beginning, setting up goals. And I want to be cautious that we're not spending a lot of time on something that we may not be doing ourselves. We obviously don't have a budget to do that. We don't have the people to do it. But is that something that's going to go into the document saying this is the expectations? And I think that, last week we thought, okay, soils, we need to get on touch of this, but I kind of think we're micromanaging now. So
right. And exactly, Sarah, based upon what Will just said, he just brought up a really good point. Soil testing's done, to identify soils for plantings and things like that and to correct an issue. And we're not going to be doing that. So we had identified that as something to do in the short term, but, going through this exercise and this discussion, it doesn't seem that we should be focusing on that right at this point. And that's something that
I feel comfortable if we move it off our short list.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate that we put it on the radar screen, included in our report, and that's probably the extent of our responsibility on it. If it was something we could do quicker and easier and without cost, then sure, go ahead and do it. But yeah, I agree with the trend of the committee on this one.
Okay.
We can get that report from the highway department, and that at least would be something we could have in there, or have something to review.
Just to document it, to have that. Yeah.
Right. And Jen, I think that I think Charles should have had to file at some point with one of the groups. So that's on public record as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, to the point, well, with exception of Will, where the rest of us are not farmers, and we shouldn't try to pretend to be farmers and do things that farmers should be doing. I think it's definitely, the role of the person who takes on the farm to do the soil tests and to manage the soil appropriately, especially geared to what they're growing. The only question I have, and I think maybe the group has appropriately made it a long-term strategy. I don't know, as part of the interviewing process, if a candidate would want to know what kind of soil they're dealing with ahead of time, because the soil quality can kind of, it's going to make a determination about like what they can do, what they can't do, what they might want to hold off on doing, what kind of investment they might envision making. That would just be my only caveat. But I agree that, we shouldn't ourselves be doing the soil tests. I don't know what that really means in the end of the day, but I just thought I'd say it.
Right.
The upside to doing the soil samples, in my mind, is that they aren't going to change significantly from now until spring. If we have interest in the orchard and there's samples pulled, I'm sorry, I don't have the screen up, but I think it was Jen saying that we don't have they have at least a baseline to go from. And if it's somebody that's experienced, which is what we want, they're going to know, hey, look, your pH is way off. You're going to need a couple tons of lime to the acre. And, that's an added expense that, is that they would include that information in their bid to account for it to make them more successful. The soil samples aren't going to change much from now until spring. It's not uncommon for the companies that I mentioned to cover the cost of them. Also, when you take a sample, you want to take it within so many feet of a consecutive sample to know, did I make the change I was hoping to make with the amendment that I applied? It's not a bad idea. It's probably less than $20 a sample, but I don't know how many on that 80-acre property you would need. That would kind of go along with identifying a prime area that we wanted to work on for the pruning. It goes a little bit with the pruning, to get something kind of started and going and get kind of a wow effect for somebody going in and doing something. The ground isn't frozen as yet. It's a possibility, but it's not a tell-all either.
Right. And Will, I think it kind of comes back to the conversation that it really boils down to the relationship with Charles, because Charles knows the best value trees and what needs to be pruned straight away, like what was on his list that hasn't gotten done. So I feel as though if we still have a good relationship, and I think it comes back to what we talked about, legacy, to say, okay, Charles, because we didn't have that transition, or we do not have the luxury of the transition, to ask, what would you do? Just like I thought, what are the key pieces of equipment the new next tenant needs to have?
Yeah. Who else could be helpful? I did come up with that name of the person that was referenced to me by Cal Yap, who was an orchardist that had worked both for Charles and even going back as far as for Jack Morrison. And I sent that into Joe Layden. The guy's name was Evan Chaput. Is that right? Joe from Harvard. I don't know if that name rings any bells. But if Charles proves to be uncooperative on that score, this is the guy who may well know the same level of detail, having done it.
Right. Yeah. I'm just saying, I think it's always worth the ask to ask Charles.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is to talk about, we categorize the resources that look like you did, Joe, on that spreadsheet that you had shared. So next is to come up with an action item calendar. So maybe we can refer back to that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's
categorized it.
I was intending on trying to put something up. It helps if I actually share screen. I'm like talking to something that none of you can see. So I was planning on basically putting together essentially a Gantt chart to just identify like what are the tasks and what are some of those deadlines that we need to do. Some of those, of course, are going to be overlapping so that it's not as linear as this. Essentially, we're going to have some parallel tracks that, for example, looking at trying to bring someone on board to go through the orchard, identify what are some of those things that we need to do right away that we're going to need to plan for January and February. At the same time, we're going to have to evaluate the APR and think about what kind of uses would be appropriate within Littleton. Again, my personal thought is that the APR is not going to be that restrictive, so that us trying to identify how do we identify that spectrum of potential orchard agricultural uses so that we can provide recommendations to the board. So there's a lot of things that I see us working in parallel track. It's just trying to make sure that we just identify what those are so that we can put those on that calendar and identify a responsible person for, say, getting in touch with someone and following up.
Okay, so let's talk about that now. So what I mean, clearly there's things that we need to do in the immediate future. Winter's coming and whatnot. So what are some of the items that we need to do immediately? We talked about inventorying the fruit, the trees, and we're relying on getting information from Charles and outside sources for that. But then also now it's as far as pruning, what mitigation steps can we do now at this time of year?
I think one thing that we spoke of is to have one person research the restrictive covenants that are on the property and really get to know it well. So that way, when someone comes in and looks for a potential use, we can say yay or nay. So,
right, but wouldn't you consider that more long-term, Sarah? Like that's not,
no, because I think
ongoing.
Well, but like, look at now, Joe's already getting people that want to have hard cider and maybe tastings or, weddings. People are going to ask those questions. So I think that I would say it's not immediate, but I think that's one of those parallel tracks that we have to know what we are going to be offering to the next tenant.
Right. And that being said, Joe, we need to talk to town council too and find out exactly what the restriction is.
I mean, that's where we could easily have town council attend the next meeting. From reviewing the APR myself, I think it's actually a lot broader than what people may think as far as what agriculture is considered, that it could be a lot more expansive than what we may typically associate. So I think it would probably be good for me to work with town council to basically say, here's the language, here's some of the things that could be considered, because it does refer back to the state definition of agriculture.
Right.
And I know from my long ago planning days, that is something that is what is considered agriculture, and conservation also knows this, is actually pretty broad. Some of it's based on income and percentage as far as revenue based on crop on the property. So I think that would be something that I could work with town council to basically provide an overview for the committee as far as here's what is really a confining part of the APR, but maybe here's sort of a whole spectrum, and basically the town itself could be the restriction here. We may not want some of these things that maybe the APR does allow.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say, is that I think the problem isn't going to be like what we can do. I think there's going to be so many opportunities that kind of narrowing them down to things that make sense for the property, things that make sense for the neighborhood, things that make sense to the town, while allowing the farmer to sort of like execute their vision and create and generate income and some degree of wealth, and to be able to maintain the operation. I think that's going to be the piece of the puzzle that we struggle with. It's not like creating opportunities. It's going to be like kind of creating a box for it.
Okay, go ahead, Paul.
So,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, a reminder that the folks that we walked the orchard with Will and Joe Layden and Chuck DeCoste, I'm thinking in terms specifically of the O'Neill's father and son, they were able to rattle off when we were out there, both at eye level, what needs to be changed, both from a from a standpoint of timeline, which I think speaks exactly to the action list there. I mean, we can guess at it, but we have at our disposal people that were willing to help, even if that's initially in context of telling us services they would do for a fee later. We can deal with that later, but I think we can at least get out of them the sort of things that need to be done immediately, and then others that can wait, and whether some things have to happen before others. But these people are capable of getting an assessment done before snowfall. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think they seem to be pretty firm on the idea that the pruning process is best done in like February when everything's kind of frozen. So, but those guys, any of those folks know it so cold as far as being able to rattle off the things that you're going to have to do between you to assess what you've got, what you could have, and what kind of timeline it's going to take to achieve that. So whether it's a construct where we have in 3 or 4 of these folks who might be willing to perform those services for the town and interview them and pick their brains, or what, we could do that as soon as our next meeting, and then have a better idea of what that action calendar is going to look like with some, sort of expertise advising it. So, we've got, Sean did call back a week or 2 ago when I had reached out to him before our first meeting, Sean O'Neill, and I'm sure Will's got direct contact to some of the other folks as well. But I'd suggest we get those folks in here. And then again, as Joe mentioned a little bit ago, on a couple of different levels, not a bad idea to have counsel available on, one of our next meetings to answer questions, not just about the APR, but about what we can and can't do in RFP process and, any other legal questions that come up.
Can I ask a quick question? Are we looking pro bono for these people, or is there a budget?
That was my question.
I don't think we have to. I mean, when we were, again, it was kind of while walking the field, and nothing was formed at that point. But we were saying, hey, it was Chuck DeCoste, myself, as I say, Will was there, and other folks, and we were making it clear. Look, to get this sort of help, we could and would be willing to pay for it. So.
Well, right,
I think that's what we should be thinking in terms of, but that doesn't mean we can't have an initial dialogue for those folks to describe the sort of services that they would be willing to provide, what time.
And I appreciate that, but who's coming up with a budget?
Oh, if we solicit quotes, then we did have some conversation about that, about what that might cost, but it can go to the selectmen's. We could bring a reserve fund transfer request forward on that. I mean,
So
I'm not imagining these are going to be huge numbers.
So there are resources for this, because the gentleman I spoke to from Berlin Orchards, I couldn't give him an idea on tree count. I had no idea. And he said, well, depending on the size of the job, it could be by the tree or by the job. You might not want all the trees done. So that was one question. The other question I had, and how are we getting the word out there that we want RFPs?
Well, we haven't. That's our job. That's this committee's job. We haven't done that.
Are we? So far it's been word of mouth. So some people have expressed interest through this group and through people that we know. But is that how we want to keep it, or are you putting the net wider?
No, the RFP has to be publicized.
Yes,
we're not there yet.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let's wait 1 second. So let's back up. Right now, what we're talking about is finding people to come forward and provide an assessment of the orchard.
Yep.
Right.
Hope to give us a list of action items and what we need to do immediately to for the orchard between now and say 4 months from now. The RFP, the long-term RFP, as far as who's going to come in and manage the orchard and what we want to look at, that is definitely something that there's a whole process for that piece of it. So it's like two separate issues. What I was going to ask you, Joe, is what is the threshold? Like, we have a list of people that have already come forward that we've already talked to that said they could help us. Yeah. What is the threshold as far as paying for their services, or if they give us a quote, like say they come in and say, yeah, we'll walk the orchard. I mean, it's really, are they going to come in and walk the orchard for free and give us an idea and then come back to us and give us a quote for what it would take to do what they recommend? Like, how are we doing this?
I think that's a really excellent question, Cindy. And the first thing is really trying to identify how, do we want sort of a informal assessment saying, a couple people walking through, here's where I'd recommend focusing in on, where the pick your own is, or do we want someone to go up and down each track? And we have plans. We have aerial shots essentially showing tree locations that they could probably circle and identify what to do. It depends on what we think that detailed inventory should be. If we wanted to basically say, we want someone to provide us with a report to walk up and down each aisle and identify specifically which trees would be pruned, which ones should just be cut down. Because I think it was Paul at that site walk with Will and 2 others where they basically said, these over here, they should probably be torn down, just cut down and replanted. If we want that type of report, then we'd first start by just identifying the scope, which quite honestly should be fairly easy to put together. And I would first say, estimate under $10,000 and just reach out to a couple to say, hey, is this going to be right? And if they're like, yeah, things can happen, then all we have to do is reach out by email, just make sure that things are tracked and recorded. And then we can select someone. We'd want to just, we need a ballpark, I think, is the first thing. And that's, I would regularly reach out to engineers and people say, are we below 10 or are we over 10? If we're over 10, how much? And
if we deal with any of those folks, Joe, I agree with everything you said. With one thing, rather than suggesting a number to them, I'd ask them what their range was, rather than suggesting one. Because if they're thinking 2,500 and we say 10, they'll say, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, Paul, I agree with you 100%. Glad we threw a number out there, but
right.
I don't want that number leaving this committee right now. So
but remember,
ask those three people. I agree with you, Joe. Let's just right now come up with the scope. I don't think we have to have the minutia of every row. I think we go by block and just be like, just give us a priority. And then if you like that person, then you could be, okay, let's come in and give us something that is more vested on their part and more intricate. I feel as though most of those people, especially some of the ones that you all have reached out, they know the orchard. And I think while they may not be, who knows, they could just handwrite a note. So, and let us know. I'm not looking for a big report.
And if there are some of the treatments, it's not like you're going in, this one's good, this one's bad, this one's good, this one's bad. It's like, these are bad, these are good. And I think we all know that primarily from the street, the trees that are closest to the street, those have been the ones that have been most maintained and most recently pruned. It's once you get into the real thick of it or down, that's where it becomes more of a question. What can be salvaged versus what really is best to plant over? And I totally agree.
Right. Okay. So to Sarah's point, we'll get someone to prioritize, to review each block and then prioritize each block based on what? What would the next step be?
So let's just confirm that we're talking about 5 blocks.
Okay.
So when you look at the map, we're not looking at the lower map. We're not looking down by the pond. So we're referencing 5 blocks. And then they'll know obviously which ones are the rock fruit up by Morrison's house. But I would just say, and just give them this map and they can rotate reference, I apologize, the R number and go from there. So, we're not going to do the lower right, which is R02-10. So that on the right side is taken out.
Okay.
So there's 5 blocks, and okay. I would just use this map. Granted, it's not, Charles probably has a really cool map, but in terms of time, let's just use this one. We can do an overlay later.
And I have basically all these blocks as separate sheets of paper as well, so that just a little easier for people then to mark up and respond on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can we just circle back with Cindy? What do you think? Just come up with like the scope of that.
Right. Exactly. So we're going to ask them to evaluate each block and prioritize it based on what? Prioritize.
I think that, and Amy, you might know this a little bit better in terms of health. So if you just come up with a grade scale, if you were to look at a block, how healthy or what's the wellness of this block, but you have to remember one of those, that top block is a huge block. So I think it would be helpful to be able to say within that block, you might, as Will talked about, you've got different microclimates. So there's definitely different trees in different blocks, and allow them to have that narrative to be able to say, okay, if they're calling that block 1, we have some sections that are better. So it's almost like you're going to have subsections within your blocks.
Okay.
Yeah. And so just in terms of like rating it, is it a combination of, you know, and maybe Will can chime in here, like disease pressure in the trees, age of the trees, like I don't know, like there needs to be some sort of method to the madness. Like if you say, okay, rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the best and 5 being the worst, like what's the criteria that you use to?
Yeah, and I agree with you. It would help if one of us was an orchardist. So
I think like age of the tree. I think disease pressure in the tree. I would say, and I'm totally making this up, I'm not an orchardist either. Maybe the amount of like work, like pruning that needs, like maybe it just that section requires an inordinate amount of time to prune. Maybe that's a third piece of criteria. Maybe we can get in touch with the gentleman who lives on the street, on Nagog Street, Mark Santori, is it? Santorini?
The arborist, yeah. And I think ultimately value because there may be a tree that needs a lot of pruning, but has a lot of value.
So value, disease, pruning. What was the other great thing I said?
I got the meeting recorded. We can pull that.
So, but that's how you want them to evaluate the block based on that, age of the trees, disease, value, pruning.
One other.
I think, Joe, and I think this is where whomever is reaching out, I would ask them because they're, right. And just be able to say, here's what we as lay people think might be important. I'm confident there's something that we haven't thought of. Yeah. So ask them. I think, Joe, that after you talk to the first person, they may tell us we're spot on, or they may just tell us we have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah. Let them educate us as to what the priorities ought to
Absolutely.
be and what they're seeing. Yeah.
Right. And then and we've got 5 blocks, have them put it in order of priority.
Yeah.
Does it have to be as detailed as a rating system, or can we just say to them, take a look at these blocks?
I agree with you, Cindy, but I don't think it's that simple because each block is so different. You've got that one of those blocks is a totally different type of tree. So that's where you're looking at pears, plums. Right. So
some blocks have more stone
each
fruits.
Block stands on its own.
Okay. So we're going to read. Go ahead, Will.
Is our approach something along the lines of get all the trees, all the blocks assessed, look at the APR and see what would be allowable in the restrictions of the APR, and then discuss a number of different business modelings and what the town would tolerate as far as events and marketing and that sort of thing at the property. I'm struggling a little bit with, yes, it's an orchard. At the end of the day, it's a block of land. Most of the farms in Littleton were orchards at one point. My farm was, a majority of it was orchard. That can be transformed into a economical, vibrant agricultural entity, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to stay an orchard. I understand that might be a preference, but are we open to other options, or are we fixed on an orchard?
Well, I think that we are, Will, but I think we have to go through this assessment or exercise before we get to the point of comparing the blocks and gathering the information we obtain through the assessments, and then comparing that information with the APR, and then taking it one step further and figuring out what do we want to do and how.
We're very much in a triage process.
Can I just mention, Will has, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, we're very much in a triage process. We have to assess, what's from some experts' point of view, what are the immediate things we have to do just to, protect the integrity of it. And then, after the analysis has been done, then we can entertain bigger questions about the various things we can do with it. All of it's appropriate, right. But I think there's kind of some of it's sequential and some of it's parallel track. But the most important thing to get out of it is get somebody with some expert eyes, either free or paid, to get out there and do the assessment piece of it. And meanwhile, we can be gathering all these other options. But right. To answer your question from my perspective, Will, we very much, I think part of our charge is to entertain all options. And, I wouldn't tip my hat on a preference rate yet, but, some of the folks when they were walking the land with us said if they as orchardists were doing it, they would never do it this way again, and having so much cover of the land be completely fruit trees, but they would have a mix of uses in there, perhaps including a lot of fruit trees, but you can certainly do other agricultural activities there, and that just opens the door to that broad range of agricultural businesses. At some point we're going to need to do like a little bit of a market research too. It's a whole different skill set we're going to need to bring into the conversation. What's viable out there, on the table at the same time as what the town's wants are.
So one thing, just as a point of reference for people that may not have been there for when the town voted for this. The town voted for this to stay in agriculture. So pure and simple. So the townspeople, they love the idea that there was an orchard. I was there to present this package. So just remember that it's ag. As long as we stay within ag, you're meeting the will of the people that voted for this piece to be preserved.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So we want to assess each block. We want someone to come in and assess each block. So now how are we going to find somebody to do that? What's going to be that process, Joe?
So we have some of the contacts that not only came with us on some of the site visits, but also have been recommended. I basically would recommend that we put together what essentially would be just a summary scope. Just here's what we're looking at doing, and then if there's people that we all have heard of, or that we have some names for people that people have filled out on the form. We just ask for just their reaction to it. What are we looking at? One of the things is we'd want to be able to evaluate some form of
how quick can you help us? That's sort of thing too, right?
But also qualifications as well. We need to have a better understanding as far as I'm good with a hacksaw to cut down a Christmas tree. I don't know if you want me trimming down some apple trees, but we want to at least have basic qualifications. What's some of your experience, and then here's basically a quote so that we can start to evaluate whether or not what we're looking at.
But it starts, I would think you making touching base with all those names and finding out what's their level of interest. Are they a potential solution to our analysis problem? Are they interested in the long-term operation of it? Are they looking to get in there and do some of the physical replication work? And then, figuring out who these people are and what it is they can offer us, then we can figure out who to bring in.
Can I ask a quick question? Because this comes back to the time frame, Joe, and I know you wear many hats. Is this something that you can delegate to someone? And what's your time frame? Because ultimately we'd like to get someone in quickly, but we also know that you have a bigger life beyond this committee. So I think, Cindy, when we kind of come up with tasks, if the committee feels comfortable, we need to start to delegate some of these tasks to keep the ball rolling.
Right.
I'm not putting myself forward.
Right. So, so Sarah, we have a list right now of how many people have already contacted us, Joe, or we've collectively contacted that might be up for the task of providing an assessment of the orchard. Would we have 5 or 7 people, 5 or 6 groups, organizations?
Yeah, 5. Yeah.
Okay. So it's easy enough just to put together a letter just to send out to them from the group. Just telling them what we're looking for. And to Paul's point, see what they come back with, and what the cost would be.
A letter's fine, but time-wise, if there's only 5 or 6, somebody,
I would just pick up the phone.
Right.
Does it have to be in writing though, Joe?
That's one of the things, is that from a procurement, and this is where I sort of then view this part of it, at least, is my responsibility anyways. We at least need to have a set standard. So, we'll get to when are we going to have our next meeting. Quite honestly, this is 4 or 5 bullet points. This is not significant. That way it's something that can be shared. You can mark it up, and then we can finalize it to then distribute. So,
right.
I can also distribute, and you just send me comments, and then I just compile. So, we're able to do it. And I see Amy on the left side of my screen keeps raising her hand.
Yeah. But if it's only a half dozen calls, I would say, just for consistency's sake, the fact that Joe is involved in procurement. We don't run afoul of things later on. He should be making those calls.
Well, I think it needs to be in writing was my point, Paul. I don't think it can be a phone call. I think it
Yeah,
needs
but
to be
this is, at this
documented.
stage, Cindy, we're
Yeah.
not giving them a formal apply for it. We're asking them, what services might you offer? Then, if once we do some information gathering, well, then we'll decide what it is we're going to formalize and send out. That's more like the invitation to bid on something.
Yeah, I agree. You're just asking, do you want to see this form or not? They may be like, hey, I'm going on vacation for the next 4 months.
Right.
So
Yep.
all you're doing is asking, and then everyone gets sent the same form.
Right.
What we're basically looking for in the industry is to ask for an assessment of the orchard for an IPM program. IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management, and that's going to be something that Helena in Deerfield or Helena in Hatfield would be able to do, or Nutrien would be able to put together. Calling either of those companies, they would tell you, our orchard guy is, that's going to cost this much. And they could give us a direction on exactly what we're looking for and who it is that can do that. I understand that that's a company of dealers, and they're going to, put it together, and they're going to recommend their product. But at a baseline level, they can tell you how much is it to develop an IPM program for this many trees and this many blocks.
But do we want to develop an IPM program, or we just want to assess the condition of the orchard right now, right? Or what's the difference?
So the IPM is going to they're going to tell you, okay, these trees are on life support because they're the oldest trees. You can leave them on life support. It's going to cost this much a year to manage that block because of their age. This group, is ragged and wild, and to get that back under control, it's going to take this many years, and it's going to be this kind of an investment. So they're
okay.
Yes, you're dealing with a salesperson, but they're a salesperson who's pushing for an economic, means to an end. So they would be able to give you a broad-based, assessment relatively quickly.
And I think on one of the site visits, and Will, this may have been the one you were at, where we got comments like some of the pruning needs to be so significant that for the first 2 years, those trees are in shock and you're not going to get any fruit. And I think that's also like another assessment so that we know almost like your rate of return. What is the timeline for some of these to be brought back into production? And I think that was one of the comments that I found really interesting was that we recognized it was a lot of work, but I think a lot of us thought, oh, well, just prune it, and then next summer they're all ready to bear fruit, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and then just to jump in, so recognizing what Joe just said about the trees needing so much pruning, and you might not be able to get any fruit from them. And I know I don't want to diverge too much from Cindy's focus on this piece, but I know we're also talking about a calendar and things having in parallel. Does the group or the town have an idea of when they want an operator in place to start actually doing the work and sort of take it over? What's the transition period, and what are the expectations? Are we making an assumption, and I'm sort of synthesizing and then making some guesses just based on what I'm hearing about the condition of the orchard, that it's not going to be a production farm next fall, that people aren't going to be coming to pick apples, and that we're just going to lose next season? Or is the idea that we hope to have some type of season next fall?
I don't think we can answer that, Amy, because we just don't know the condition of the orchard, and we have no way of being able to tell that. Okay. So
all the more reason to get Joe on the phone to those experts and then get them on a letter and see what we can get for analysis. I've got another thing that starts at 7, Madam Chair. Sorry, I gotta jump in here unless we're gonna be
okay. No worries. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thank you guys. Great work.
Thanks. All right. So thanks, Paul. So are we on agreement? Are we on the same page?
Somebody I don't think you're going to have somebody come in next year and have a business, a productive production business. That the modeling would be something along, you know, a 5-year head start. Then they get into, you know, the real deal. And it's going to have to be somebody that's willing to take on that risk up front, to get things kind of whipped back into shape. It's not, you can prune the trees to save them from going any further backward, but you're not really putting them forward. It's just damage control at this point.
Okay.
Next season is not your production season. Just hope we're going to get something started and the ball rolling. I guess that's what my concern is with the different kinds of models that might work. So somebody could be generating income in that 2 to 5 year time frame.
Yeah, I think I look at the next year or so as an investment phase. So, I mean, granted, you're going to be obviously investing a lot, but there's going to be a lot of, you know, sweat and tears in the next year. So this is not going to be profitable for quite some time based on what needs to be done. But gosh, I really feel as though we need to get somebody in there for the spring, because if someone doesn't take care of the orchard, like spraying and things like that, you will lose those trees.
Okay.
And that's where I think, and this is something that, for this group as well as the select board, if we go out, sorry, just advertising an RFP, we don't need to award. But you could get a good sized fish on that line if we do dangle that RFP out there, you know, for February, that then maybe we do find someone. And if we don't, then we have these other alternative steps that we can take that may require investment. So that's where, when I said we have a couple things that need to run in parallel, that's an example, because we could get someone, and you know, if someone has a cider business, they may have the capital to do investment, or we may not, and it could be someone that is looking to be an owner operator type situation and put their blood and sweat equity into the project. We could have a full range of things that we just don't know. But the concern would be that if we're not putting out an RFP until like May,
yeah,
we've missed the year.
Yeah, we can't.
That was my question.
I mean, we can't. It has to be done really beginning of February at the latest. And
Okay.
and I'm happy to hear you say, Joe, that it doesn't have to be awarded. It's the only way that we're going to keep people going, because everyone is already focused on what they're buying next year. They have to make their buy orders really November, December for already next year. So, yeah, no, I see that as going quickly.
Right. So Joe, let's bring in town council for our next meeting.
Yep.
So we're meeting the week. We're not meeting next week. We're meeting the following week, correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Let's do that, Joe, just so that we can find out exactly, you know, allowable uses and things like that, what exactly that language is under the definition. I think that'll be really helpful. And then that will help us in tandem, start talking about an RFP to be issued this winter.
And that's enough time for also, I think, for pulling together essentially a list for a scope of work, and to get feedback from all of you, and to at least get some feelers out there on what we're looking at.
Right.
But so can I just ask for a point of clarity? We're not waiting till the next meeting to kind of go through the scope. So I'm hoping that we can start to throw that out this week.
I'm going to put together a bullet list. You know, I'll distribute it, look for feedback. So I just would have people respond back to me. You know, I'll blind copy everyone so we can just take your feedback. I can consolidate things together, and you know, the purpose is to start to get that feedback. And if we find that it needs to be changed. If there's things that come up, then that's perfect timing for a meeting to try to pivot if need be.
Right.
That's a question.
But
Does
no, I'm not
anyone
waiting
know-
for the meeting.
Does anyone know of any other orchard that is on a restricted piece of land that is owned by someone else? I know we have like Great Brook in Carlisle, but that's a totally different model. Do we know of any orchard
I believe Sholin Farms in Leominster, I believe that is a town-owned orchard managed, I think, by a nonprofit. It's sort of like the model, like a library, like if the library is owned by the town, but then there's like the Friends of the Library. I think it's some sort of relationship like that.
It would be fascinating to see if they sent out an RFP, when it was, what it looked like.
Do you want me to contact them? I'm happy to reach out to them.
That'd be awesome. I know I'd be curious to see what it looks like.
No, I'll do that for sure.
Thank you.
I had also done a Google search for others. I think there was one in Lincoln. I think there was one in, I want to say Concord as well. That I remember seeing an RFP. It may not have been for an orchard, but it was for a farm. As I was doing just general search to try to look at examples for how things were done, mainly on a requirement and reporting standpoint, because we didn't have any reporting for this orchard.
Yeah, so there was I think was the McGrath property, it's by the Rotary, by the prison. It's now Battle Brook Farm or Battle Road Farm. That was a big property that had a house on it. It's beautiful. It's like overlooks the Sudbury River. I believe that was a town-owned property that's now being farmed. And Gaining Ground is a nonprofit. I think it's owned by the Thoreau. I feel like their lease is with the Thoreau Society, but I could be wrong. Or maybe it's through the town.
Okay. All right, good. So I think, Joe, you'll have something for us this week or early next week.
Yep.
And are you going to call people too? Or are you just going to put
once
together
I want to send that out to all of you just so I can get that out and sort of think through what we just discussed and make sure I got those points down, and then I'll start reaching out to people as well.
Once you get the talking points down, what we're looking for.
Yep.
Okay.
So Joe, you're going to reach out to the couple names I put on there, like Jared Byrne and.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I have some from when we were doing some of the site visits, I have some other contacts that I'll add into that spreadsheet as well. The Community Harvest Project, they out of Grafton. I did a lot of work with them when I worked there. They actually own an orchard. They purchased an orchard 5-6 years ago, I think, in Groton. I talked with her a bit, and she basically said she'd be glad to be able to help out and be a resource for trying to figure out how to take an older orchard and bring it back. So I think the main thing is going to be just trying to get response. All these people who are offering help is just trying to nail them down and get the help. I think that's going to be the challenge.
Right, exactly. Okay, good. So, so I think that was it. And we just talked about next steps. And so our next meeting is going to be, not next week. So that would be December 1st, Wednesday.
Yep.
Well, so we'll do, our next meeting will be Wednesday, December 1st at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And then we'll just look for that information from Joe. Everybody's going to reply back to Joe alone. Don't reply all. And we should be good.
And then Cindy, maybe that would be a good opportunity to provide an update for the select board at our December 6th meeting.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll give
sort of keep.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if it's under your member update, just to make sure people know we're doing.
Right, like I'll give an update Monday, but
okay, good.
On the 6th, we'll be able to give a more comprehensive update. That's perfect. All right, good. Is there any other comments or questions from anybody in the group?
Nope.
No. Okay. All right, good. So that concludes our meeting. Next meeting is December 1st, and we'll look for that information to be coming from Joe this week or next.
Yep.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks. Everyone have a great Thanksgiving if I don't talk to you or see you.
Thanks, you too.
Yes, you too.
Thanks.
Thanks again. All right.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.